The Sunken Town is it's sort of the central metaphor to the book. When you don't know what to call your book, go with the central metaphor. In Maine, and I'm sure in many places, I know in California too, there are man-made lakes. So they flood a river valley, usually for electricity and all that. So when I was in Maine, there was a Lake Flagstaff. It was one of these, there was a town in a river valley where they decided to flood the river valley in order to bring power to Maine back in the 1950s. And so there's stories of people rolling their houses on logs kind of out of the flood zone and then them flooding it. And I've been canoeing there, and to me, this is just something I cannot get out. It creeps me out. I do not know why. I do not think there should be man-made objects underwater that aren't like a shipwreck. It freaks me out. And I wish I could explain it. And so there is a town. She inherits a house on a pond, a fake pond, Lone Loon Pond. And under the pond is the remnants of this town. And she discovers that. And on the surface, everything looks beautiful. And underneath, there is, a darker potential. So here she is in her life. Everything's fine. I'm adopted. Life is great until she's forced to look under the surface and see what's there. So sort of a simplification, but it ends up being a metaphor for, her finally being willing to look down and examine things and what's underneath that beautiful, pristine surface of the lake that you could just keep looking at that way, or you could actually explore the depths.
Everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. As I talk to my guest today, I'm looking past her, not because I want to, it's because I can see through the doors into the backyard, and it looks beautiful where she is, and where I am is cold. And I'm rubbing my hands to stay warm. I'm excited to have Karen here on the podcast. We're talking about her new book, just came out, and lots of great stuff for her. I'm excited to have her here. And if you're looking for help as an author, you're looking for a community to help you on your journey, we're going to talk about that as well. We've got so much to cover. Karen Nelson, welcome to the podcast. Nice to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. Tell everybody, how come it's so beautiful and warm out that window behind you? Where are you in this big world of ours?
I am based in California in the Silicon Valley. So we are blessed with lots of nice sunshine this time of year. And I happen to have an office that sits out actually on a covered-in porch. So I was saying I do have a little hidden heater under my desk keeping me warm, but it looks beautiful and sunny outside.
It looks terrible there. It looks so
it's terrible.
Beautiful. That's the angry Canadian there. Yes.
Yeah,
as I look outside, it's nothing like that.
It's expensive. There's a lot of weird tech people here. No, but you don't want to be here.
Okay,
You've got Niagara Falls up there. You've got beautiful, beautiful things to see out your window too.
Big hill, lots of water. No spoilers for anybody, but that's kind of all it is. But yeah, it's great. It's beautiful. I love getting to travel virtually with all my guests and see all the different places as people come on camera. So I'm enjoying the view. I am glad you're here, and thank you for bringing a little bit of the sun with you. I love that. It's good to have you here.
You're welcome.
So we have so many authors listening, and I always like to start our conversation here. There are people that are just starting to write. They don't know what's ahead for them, and they have so many questions and very little answers. You have your book out, which is exciting. You've learned something in the process, but I got to start where did the journey of becoming a writer begin for you? What was that initial spark?
It is how I have always processed the world. So I have a little book on my shelf called The Popcorn Popper That Wouldn't Stop Popping that I probably wrote as soon as I was able to string words together. So I've always been a big reader, and hand in hand with that has always been wanting to be a writer. and not necessarily a published writer, but just writing. I'd make stories up about my stuffed animals. My mother, always talks about that. And it was just how I always went about things. So I always wrote and I always read. And then I did it more formally in college. I got a degree in creative writing and then have just never, ever stopped the whole time. I've always had a writing group. I've always taken classes, and it's just for me. It was always just for me. It wasn't necessarily that it needed to get published or it needed to be in book form or anyone needed to read it. It was just how I, like I said, processed everything. So
Okay.
that's how I started.
So the one thing I see when a lot of authors struggling in the beginning stages is they're feeling like they're doing a lot of this on their own. They don't have a community yet. They haven't met fellow authors. They're trying to stay motivated on their own. There's nobody in their corner encouraging them or keeping them accountable to keep writing. So talk about the idea of writing in community. Why is that so important?
Absolutely. Writing is such a solitary thing, and you have to be alone to write. You can't. You have to. That's why so many writers are introverts and can just spend all this time with their imaginary friends and put them on the paper. But for me, having a writing community has been a huge thing, and I've had it from the very start of doing this. Obviously in college you take classes and you get that. But once I was out of school and I'd moved to Boston, in Massachusetts in the U.S. And I just went to the local community classes who happened to be offering, writing classes, or creative writing classes. So I signed myself up. I didn't have to have any special talent whatsoever. And by going to those classes, I met people in the area who were also writers. And, being willing to put myself out there and say, do you want to have coffee? And to get to know other people. And you kind of start to identify who in the class has, is a reader for you. I mean, some people are great readers for you. Some people are not. And for you, it's the same thing. You're going to be a great reader for other people. And then there's going to be some books that, they're great writers, but they do not resonate with you at all. And so I just kept my mind open about who it was I was meeting. Didn't matter what the package of them looked like. It was all about the work we were doing. So I would go out for coffee with old ladies. I would go out for coffee, and I was very young at the time. But I quickly found that just sort of networking and being willing to be friendly helped me meet other people that were also in the same situation. So we then could exchange work and hold each other accountable. And I just continued that when I moved. I grew up in California. I'm actually back in my childhood home. And when I moved back to California, it was the same thing. I didn't have a community out here in person. So I went to the Stanford University is down the street. They do community classes. I met people that way, and it just kind of grew out of that. So in person has been helpful for me, but also we have all these wonderful online resources. So it's, there's lots of meetup groups. I have been in the same writing group now for 20 years, and we don't live in the same place. So we will actually, every 2 weeks, we get together on Zoom and just have what we call office hours, where we go around and each of us whines and complains about how hard it is to write. And some weeks it's just, I didn't do anything. And, my house is really clean because I was avoiding writing, or we talk about the books we've read or any of that. But it really helps having that community and check-in. And then just, those people, when I met them through a writing program, and it wasn't that I thought we were going to be best friends. And now, 20 years later, they're the people that are celebrating with me, this book coming out. And so it's been really wonderful.
Yeah. For those people that are listening as authors and they're like, that sounds like a dream, like to have a community like that and be going that long.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So any tips for an author listening on how to find a community like that? Like, where do we even look?
Yeah, so I'd do a couple things. I would go, look around you. So do you live next to a college? Do you live next to, does your community center offer writing classes? Who in your immediate area is offering that, and be willing to go. And it may take a little while. It may be that the first class you go to, it feels overwhelming, or it's, not the right level for you, but just be willing to stick with it and be open-minded and be open and willing to grow. And then I would say, just go online and Google writing community near me.
Right.
In my other life, I run a nonprofit organization that's a literary nonprofit that we put on writing workshops. And often I ask people how they found me and that writing workshop. And they say, well, I Googled, writing workshops near me, and up it popped that you were hosting an in-person workshop down the street. And so they say they signed up. So there's lots of organizations like mine that have online classes. We always, our organization is called Writing by Writers, and that would be writingxwriters.org, like 4x4. So writingxwriters.org. But you can go on there and, we have classes. And one of the things we always like to say is that our goal of you coming out of the workshop is that you have one or two trusted readers, because that's all you really need. You don't need to have 500 people. It doesn't have to be your spouse. It doesn't have to be your best friend. We want you to find one person that you connect with and that you can share this work with, and someone that, if they haven't heard from you in 2 months, will say, hey, I really liked that piece you turned in. Have you done anything with it? Poke.
Nudge, nudge.
And even if you say, oh God, no, it's been sitting in the drawer, it's just having someone that holds you accountable. So I think I'm pretty direct. I would say to someone, I need you to hold me accountable, even if I'm not so nice when you send me the email and say, have you done anything this month? And I say, no. But just having that, and like I said, being open to making connections with people that may not on the surface seem like the person who's going to be your best friend, but you really can connect through your creativity and your art and what you're writing about.
Can you give us an idea of what a writing class would look like with you and your organization? Like, what kind of stuff would you cover?
Yeah, so we have all different levels, and our goal as an organization is kind of to fill the gaps. So we have some online classes that are just a 2-hour class that's on a certain element of craft. So, how to create a character that your reader is interested in, how to dialogue. We have one up right now that's queer writers reading queer writers. So understanding, how that experience comes into the world. And then we also do workshops where you would turn in 5,000 words and your cohort would read it and they'd give you feedback. And none of these classes are for all levels. So you don't have to qualify for any certain, you don't have to be good. You don't have to be comfortable, or you have to be comfortable with putting yourself out there, but you don't have to think, oh my gosh, this piece is ready to go. It's best if you're bringing a piece that you've taken it as far as you can, and now you need feedback. The other type of class we offer in-person workshops for people who've written a complete novel. It's very hard sometimes to get feedback on a complete novel, especially from a writer. It's very different, I think, if you have a friend read it who's not a writer, because although they can give you feedback as a reader, I think in the writing process, it's much more important to get feedback from someone who's a writer, who's able to put it into words that you will understand as a writer, or it'll resonate with you differently, because they will have a better idea of kind of the way it's constructed behind the curtain. So I think it's really helpful to get writers to read it. And I think it's really helpful to get people who don't know you to read it.
Right.
Because they're going to come with a different perspective. They're not going to be like, oh, that sounds like that story she told me about when her mother did whatever. Yeah. So we have a workshop that's for a full book-length manuscript. That is something that we ask people to submit a first chapter to, since our faculty are going to spend a good 300 pages. We want to make sure it's a good fit and that you're going to get something out of it. But we also have a book building project. So if someone is interested in writing a novel or a memoir or a collection of essays, or it's basically a book length manuscript, we do a program called Draft, which it is a 2-year program. So what you have to have coming into it is a first chapter and an idea. And the first chapter doesn't have to be brilliant. It just has to be like, okay, I've put some thought into this and I'm ready to work on it for 2 years. And so it's both online and in person. We start off, and at the first 6-month checkpoint, they turn in 75 pages or 20,000 words. And then the next one, it's 40,000 words. And then 6 months later, it's 60,000 words. And by the end of the 2 years, it's an 80,000 words. And, and that's the maximum. I mean, some people just turn in 100 words over and over again. But it's a group of 15. And we have 3 faculty. So the first semester, we call it, you would work with 1 faculty and 4 other cohorts. And then the next semester, you work with the next faculty and 4 other cohorts. And then the third, you work with the third faculty. And your cohort kind of shifts around because of the way the math works, but you end up with each other at all times. And then the final semester, you choose who you want to work with again from the faculty-wise. So there's people that come in, like I said, that have only written the idea of a chapter. There's also people that have come in that have written a whole book, and this is their opportunity to rewrite it. So it's really a wonderful project. These people bond in an incredible way. And again, our goal is to help them and guide them, but also to stay out of it so that they bond. We do online office hours, so they can do exactly what I was saying I do with my group, is just come on and say, oh my God, I'm stuck here. Anyone have any advice? And that's led by a faculty. We also do a book reading a month. So I think, as your listeners probably know, it's different to read a book as a reader versus to read a book as a writer. Right. And so they are helping people read as a writer and really keep that hat on and understand the craft elements. So they read the book as a writer and talk about it from a writing perspective, not just, oh, I loved it, but okay, how did they handle time here? How did they go back and forth between the 2 storylines? What did they do to make you feel empathy for the character? And really break it down. So it kind of helps on all levels there. And at the end, we've had people who have books that are basically ready to have, one more go through and be sent out to either an agent or a small press. And we have others that they're like, okay, first draft. And that's why it's called Draft. And, and having that first solid draft is so wonderful. Personally, I find rewriting much better than writing. So, and I think that writing is just a series of rewriting for me. So to have had my hand held through the process of doing a first draft and then kind of like, okay, now I know when I need to go back in, and then can go back and do it. It's great. So we love it. We love this program and the people that are through it. So there's a little something, everything. An intro craft class that's 2 hours online, an online class to get your manuscript looked at. We do have in-person classes to get your manuscript looked at, but then these 2 book-length projects, which are more, I think, unique in the writing world. So a little something for everything. And we find that our people, they start in one and they cycle through. So we kind of, they become part of our community. Because as you said, it's really important to find a community. And once they kind of lock into us, they will stay with us and go through. I should say our faculty are all National Book Award winning level of authors. So you're getting to work with people who tend to teach in the university, who are very accomplished themselves. And my business partner is a woman named Pam Houston, who is also an author and a teacher. And it's really important to her to pick people who, yes, are great writers, but are more importantly, great teachers and wanting to be there to share the craft. They have a passion for teaching and helping and guiding and being a part of that community, not being up on a pedestal and on the lit stage and reading their book out to the world, but they really want to help writers get their work out into the world and improve. So those are the people we focus on for our faculty.
So as you're explaining all this amazing community,
that was a lot.
Right now, I'm thinking there's somebody hitting pause right now and rewinding back to that website, which is in the show notes, but they're rewinding back. They're like, I got to write that down. Again, tell us the name of the website again, so that we'll have it here again.
It's called Writing by Writers is the organization. It's a 501c3 nonprofit, so we've got a mission. Everything's tax deductible that comes to us, and so the website is writers.org, and if you just Google Writing by Writers, you'll be able to find us.
Go. All right, we'll make sure we have the link too.
Yes.
The one thing that I know when I talk to people in podcasting and authors is sometimes they go and they seek feedback on their work, whether it's a podcast or a book, and they tend to be asking more for people to tell them they're doing a great job than to get feedback on how they can be better. So
Absolutely.
how do we open ourselves up as a new author to feedback, which could be perceived as criticism, right? We love our baby. We love this thing that we're creating, and we don't want anybody to tell us that we're not on the right path or we could do it better. We just want somebody to say, good job, keep going, you're doing great. But that's not really going to help us in long term. So how do we open ourselves up to constructive feedback that makes us better in what we do as authors?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think it is very hard for a lot of people because, as you said, it is your baby. You've put your passion into this, your heart. If someone says, well, this doesn't feel true, and you say, but that's what actually happened.
Right.
I think that is something you have to learn. I mean, some people are good at it to begin with, but it is something that you have to learn. And I think if you stop and think, do I want to get better, or do I just want people to tell me how great I am? And you have to, I think, say to yourself, okay, I want to get better. Writing is a very, very difficult business. It is rejection after rejection after rejection. So, and you hear that from even the best writers that have now published a gazillion copies, that, you just have to develop thick skin. But developing thick skin doesn't mean not being open to hearing what people have to say. So I think it is telling yourself, okay, I want to get better. And the only way I'm going to get better is to, be open to feedback and putting it out there. And I think, there are going to be people that gives you feedback that just doesn't resonate with you. And that's fine. You can think, okay, that's not right. That's not what I was trying to do. But if you stop and you perhaps have more of a conversation with them and they say, oh, I hated your character. And you think, oh my God, well, that character was me. So are they saying they hate me? No, try to be open and say, okay, what didn't you like? Was it the character not sympathetic? Was it the actions they took? And then, I think it's important as a writer in your growth to learn what you're good at and what you're not good at. I know that I am a problem solver. So I will solve my character's problems before I really let them get messy. So I don't let things get messy enough on the page. So I try really hard. And I also, like I said, for me, writing is rewriting. So my first version, I just need to get it on the page. It does not matter if it's pretty. No one has to read it besides me, and just get it there. And then, and I'm also more of an intuitive writer. So I haven't plotted something out. I've just inhabited the world, inhabited the character, started walking them around and kind of see what happens and how it feels. And I have in the back of my mind, okay, let it get messy, let her fall on her face. Don't fix it yet. You just go with kind of how it feels. And I can write a scene or a chapter. But then that's a great time to give it to someone and say, okay,
Right. Right.
did I let her fall on her face? What can you see? And so being open to that feedback. Now, I also think it's important not to be prescriptive when you give something to somebody and say, I just really want you to tell me if this part is working. I think that's great if it's someone you know really well and you're in a certain section and you're like, okay, best writing partner, can you please tell me, did I get the dialogue right here?
Yeah.
And that's fine. But when someone goes and picks your book up on the shelf, you don't get to say to them, oh, and here's what I meant to do, and this is what you're supposed to think going into it. And so to try, when you give your work to someone, to think of it as they're picking it up off the shelf.
Yeah.
What is resonating with them? Because it's going to be more interesting that way if you stay open to what that works for them and what doesn't work for them. So that's a long answer.
Right. It's kind of like a lawyer being admonished for leading the witness.
Yes.
Right? It's kind of like, no, don't. You can't do that. You got to let them follow their own path, right?
Exactly.
Okay. I like that. Okay, so so that's one thing I really wanted to cover in our episode today together is because I have authors that reach out to me and they're like, Dave, I'm looking for a community. I don't know where to look. So hearing about your community is amazing. And the other thing too is if for some reason that doesn't work for you as you listen, you might be the one to create your own community at your local public library. You just set it up. You might be the person to do this, right?
Yes. I mean, I think that's a great thing. And you only need one person. You just need to start with one person. And your local library is a wonderful place to go. Your local independent bookstore.
Right.
These are places that writers and readers go to. And just finding a buddy.
Yeah. There you go.
Finding a buddy. Start with one. All you need is one reader.
Don't swim alone. Don't write alone. Don't ride your bike alone. Don't go for a walk alone. Yeah, you need that. You need that community. I love it. So let's celebrate your book. Now, let's switch gears to the readers now who may not ever write a book, but they're looking to fall in love with their next favorite author. Congratulations on your book. It's out. Tell us about it. Like, come on. Let's do some celebrations here.
It is. My novel is called The Sunken Town, and it is a story about a 30-year-old woman named Lindsay who never gave much thought to the fact that she was adopted until she unexpectedly inherits her birth mother's home in Maine. It's a farmhouse. It also comes with a dog. And this forces her on a journey that she never planned to take. And along the way, she finds out the extent to which everyone was willing to go to protect her. Mm-hmm. So it's told from Lindsay's point of view, and it's also told from Claire's point of view, who is her birth mother. And you get the backstory of how Claire got pregnant and why she gave Lindsay up for adoption. And then you get Lindsay's story of her discovering this house has been left to her and that forcing her on the journey to actually look at her own adoptive parents, her birth parents, what's nature, what versus nurture, and all sorts of family secrets are in there to be looked at.
Okay, and you just had a little celebration for the launch of the book. How did that go with family and friends?
It was great. My 84-year-old mother came, nice. Which is fun. She's been waiting a long time to read a book of mine, but it was really fun because I'm sure like many of you out there, writing has been my passion, but it's also something I do on the side. I do run a writing nonprofit, but my friends are not aware of how much I write. And they also don't understand how hard it is. And they always mean well when they say, when are we gonna read your book? And you think, oh my God, can we just please not? And so finally, here we are, all these years later, they are able to read my book. And so it was a little strange at first to think that people I knew were gonna become readers of my writing friends were my readers, but not my friends. But it was really a wonderful celebration, and they were very, very supportive, and it was great. So I'm thrilled to have been able to celebrate with everybody, and I'm thrilled this book is out in the world.
What kind of feedback have you had so far about the book?
So far, so good.
Yeah.
I think they're all just kind of shocked that I actually wrote it. I mean, it's, and a lot of them, of course, want to know what's true versus what I made up, and which is fun. So
talk us through the writing of the book. What kind of experiences have you had during the writing process that kind of helped shape the book?
Okay, well, so the inspiration behind the book it started many years ago. When I was just out of college, my boyfriend at the time was asked to go and live in a farmhouse in Maine that came with a dog because his boss at the time was executor of estate of the woman who owned the dog in the house, had gone out for, I say, milk, done something, had left the house to go run an errand and was killed in a car accident and never returned. And so he was asked to take care of the house while they figured it all out. She had no living relatives. So for me as a writer, I would go visit him on the weekends, and you would just walk into this house, and it was exactly how she had left it. And it was fascinating. So it just, my little wheels in my brain started turning, and that was something I just filed away for later. And I'm sure anyone that's listening who's a writer, things will resonate with them in the world, and they'll think, oh, and they'll just kind of file it away, whether it's mentally or it's in the notepad or it's in the Scrivener or it's a memo on the phone, whatever the method is, it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. And so, like my main character, Lindsay, in the Sunken Town, I am also adopted. However, I've also never been interested in finding my birth parents. And people always think this is odd about me. Like, why don't you want to know? Why don't you want to know? And so I took those two elements and I always said, well, you'd have to force me on the journey. So I thought, well, wait a minute. What if this house had been my birth mother? That would have forced me on the journey. So that got me to start writing this book. And I wrote essentially a 300-page complete book from Lindsay's point of view, having, inherited the house and then what the heck happens. And that was kind of, as I talked about before, a solid draft. And it was really me teaching myself my process for writing, like how to trick myself to sit in the chair. I would sit down and I'd set a little timer and I would say, I have to sit here in my chair for 2 hours. Yeah. Even if I'm staring at the cursor for 2 hours, I have to do that. Some people will set page limits. Mine seems to be time. And, I'd get through it by doing that. And so then after that novel went in the drawer. And I thought, woo, that was great. Taught myself how to do that. Let's start something new. And then fast forward to later, I was at one of the workshops we put on for writing by writers. And one of our faculty was a man named Richard Bausch, who to me is a literary icon. And he was teaching a class, and I don't usually take a class because I'm usually running around and making sure coffee is filled. And I thought, okay, this is your chance. Take a class with him. And so I'd already sort of had a book in my head. I know a lot of writers do that. You have sort of things, you're hiking or you're doing the laundry and you start thinking about it. Ann Patchett is a famous writer who's famous for working the whole thing out in her head before she sits down to write. So I sort of had something, and it was a generative class. So the first day he gave us a writing prompt, and this story started to come out. And Lindsay's book is set in Maine, and I went to college in Maine, and I'd always wanted to write about sort of my college time. And so that started to come out. And what I realized pretty quickly was, okay, I'm really writing a layer of that book in the drawer. So I ended up writing Claire's entire story. So Claire ends up being the birth mother who ends up being killed in the car accident. So I wrote that all. And when I had written Lindsay's story, I had a dead birth mother. I didn't have a birth father. I didn't have anything else. Well, now suddenly I have a birth father. I have circumstances. So it became, for me, a logic problem. Like I said earlier, I like to solve problems. So I took Claire's story and I took Lindsay's story and I put the two of them together. And now what had happened influenced what happened with Lindsay. So I kept maybe 100 pages of that 300-page book, which I know some of your writing, newbie writers are,
Wait a minute. What?
Oh my God, you're throwing away 200 pages? Well, I wouldn't do that, clearly, but it's true. You end up throwing away like 5 times the amount. And that's another thing you have to get comfortable with as a writer. And you don't have to throw it away. Technology's great. It can go in another folder.
Yeah.
It's over there.
Yeah.
It's
still there.
It's just not in this document.
Yeah.
So, which I'm sure with your podcasting.
Yeah.
Clips go over there.
All the time.
Go away. They're still here.
Yeah.
So I took the first 100 pages. I kept about 100 pages of Lindsay, and then I wrote 100 new pages intertwining the two of them together. And I was so much happier with the product. And that is what ended up becoming the novel, The Sunken Town.
Okay, so as a writer, I want a demonstration from you. You walk into this home of this woman. The dog is there looking at you like, who the heck are you? And like, talk about it walking into a world that's on pause. Like, everything is the way it was. Just like, I'm just going to pop out, grab something, I'll be right back. I'm thinking, if somebody walked into my home right now, they'd be like, who was this guy? Like, what is going on here? I'm trying to make sense of all this. And why is that there? And what's this for? And what's important to this person? You can tell what people love and what they admire and the stories. But how do you, like, you walk through the door for the first time. How were you feeling as you walk into this home of a stranger that's like been just put on pause?
I think it's probably similar to what an archaeologist feels, when they discover the ruins of, Pompeii or whatever. And I think the wonderful thing, so walking through the door, yes, it's every sense is going. And I think as a writer, that's also something that's important to pay attention to, is that, we experience the world with all 5, however many senses we have, all of our senses. And as a writer, taking note that all of those senses are going to become important when you end up putting it on the page. So you want to be able to describe what it looks like, but also what it smells like and what it sounds like and what the textures are of things. So being kind of wide open and like using all your senses and making notes of it. Now, the great thing about a fiction writer is you don't have to keep a single thing. All you have to do is keep that sort of feeling. So the real woman, she was a hoarder, I would say, in my world. She apparently did all the props for the theater. So there were just so much just junk, in the house that was using for costumes or using for props and all that. That made it not even a little bit into my book. But it was more just what really resonated with me, which was, yes, the dog. The dog resonated with me, this poor dog. And at the time, I'm a huge animal fan, and I am also a dog lover. At the time, I had never had a dog. Eventually, I got my own dog. And so when she inherits the dog, that's my experience with my own dog. Okay. Not with the dog that she inherited, but, it all gets meshed together. So it's the things that resonate with you as a writer that's important. And you can make it all up. Yeah. But those feelings are which I think you hold on to. So.
Those are like, if you think of, I think of people that are on climbing. They're climbing those walls, and they have anchor points that they get for the next step or the next climb, the next reach. They have these anchor points that bring them up the wall. The anchor point for this story is walking through that door of that house for the first time. And going from being a stranger on the outside of the house to walking into this place, and now you kind of feel a little belonging because you've been kind of thrust into this, right? The dog is looking to you like, hey, exactly. I'm hungry here, right? Come on. So you automatically move into this person's life. So I like the idea of that coming through in the book. So had you not had that experience, you probably wouldn't have been able to write that element of the story to the way you can, because you actually lived it to some degree in a different context.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. So it is. It's the things that resonate with you in the world.
Yeah.
They resonate with you for a reason. And I think that when people are writing, people often say, well, what do you write about? I don't even know what to do to start a book. And I always say, you need to write about what you're trying to figure out. Like, what is the thing you can't get out of your head? Some people will write about addiction or abuse or very dark trauma because that's what they can't get out of their head. I'm fortunate. I've had a very lovely life, but there are still many things that I can't get out of my head. So that feeling walking into that house where that person had left, I couldn't get that out of my head.
Yeah.
A lot of landscape that I can't get out of my head. It's like, that sunrise over the lake, at a certain time with a certain person, like it just something in there, because it resonates with you. When you end up putting that on the page, no matter how you change it, it's going to resonate with the people who are reading it because it is true to you. It's your truth, whether it's the truth of what happened in reality.
Yeah.
So often I think that fiction is more true than memoir because you're writing about the emotional truth. And in some ways, it's more freeing. You can really write the emotional truth than having to be worried about sticking to the facts, which I think is why some people will, they start out writing a memoir, but they're like, what if I fictionalize it? And then that just frees them up to really be able to tell the story.
Yeah.
Or vice versa.
Yeah.
Like, why am I trying to make this fiction when really this all happened and I should just write it as is?
Yeah.
I also think it's important for new writers to not worry about who's going to be reading it. Just write it. Don't worry about upsetting your mother or your father or your children or your best friend or your husband. Write it. They never need to read it. You can edit it all out later. Just write it. Get it out. And you may find that all you needed to do was write it and it never needs to go in the world. And that was it. You wanted to process what was happening.
Yeah.
Or you may find that I really have something here that's going to resonate with a lot of people. And now I want to take, change the names and some of the identifying factors and go forward.
Yeah.
So I think people shouldn't limit themselves when they're starting. It's hard. It's hard. Writing is hard. And whatever you can do to just get yourself to move forward and put it on the page, you can fix it all. You can fix it all later.
Yeah. All right. So tell us why the Sunken Town, the title for the book. Where does that come from?
Wow. The Sunken Town is it's sort of the central metaphor to the book. When you don't know what to call your book, go with the central metaphor. In Maine, and I'm sure in many places, I know in California too, there are man-made lakes. So they flood a river valley, usually for electricity and all that. So when I was in Maine, there was a Lake Flagstaff. It was one of these, there was a town in a river valley where they decided to flood the river valley in order to bring power to Maine back in the 1950s. And so there's stories of people rolling their houses on logs kind of out of the flood zone and then them flooding it. And I've been canoeing there, and to me, this is just something, I cannot get out. It creeps me out. I do not know why. I do not think there should be man-made objects underwater that aren't like a shipwreck.
Yeah.
It freaks me out. And I wish I could explain it. And so there is a town. She inherits a house on a pond, a fake pond, Lone Loon Pond. And under the pond is the remnants of this town. And she discovers that. And on the surface, everything looks beautiful. And underneath, there is, a darker potential. So here she is in her life. Everything's fine. I'm adopted. Life is great until she's forced to look under the surface and see what's there.
I see what you did there. Okay.
Sort of a simplification, but it ends up being a metaphor for, her finally being willing to look down and examine things and what's underneath that beautiful, pristine surface of the lake that you could just keep looking at that way, or you could actually explore the depths.
Okay. So, all right. Well, before we go, I want to ask one more question at the end. But to connect with you directly, is there another website that we need to go to, or where you are most active on social?
Yes. So my website is easy. It's my name. It's KarenNelson.net. Okay. And that's spelled the normal way, KarenNelson.net. So that's my website that has my book on it, and it actually connects to Writing by Writers as well.
Good.
And some of my, I do travel writing, so it's got my other stuff on it. And then I am most active on Instagram as K Nelson Writer. And then I have a writing page on Facebook as I think, Karen Nelson Writer.
Okay.
And I'm on Amazon, and I'm on Goodreads. And, anywhere that you can find writers, I'm part of it. And that's honestly, you asked about community. Goodreads, I know we all have different feelings about Amazon and the fact that they've taken over Goodreads. But there is Goodreads, and there are other online forums like that, which are another way to connect with readers and writers. It just takes one person. So if there's someone who seems to be reading all the same things as you are, that's a good, you have to put yourself out there and connect that way too. So
okay, so I'm a new purchaser. I have your book. It just arrived. I'm ready to open it for the first time. I haven't read a word yet. I've heard the podcast, but I haven't read it yet.
Yes.
What is your love letter to me as a reader before I open this book? What do you want me to know?
Ooh, that's a great question. Well, I'm hoping that you don't need to know anything. I'm hoping that I've done a good job of you starting from page 1 and being sucked into it. But for me, I think I want you to grab your beverage of choice, whether that is tea or wine or bourbon or whatever. If you have a dog, get them to cuddle up next to your side and sit down and just sink into it and try to enjoy living in the world and learning everyone's secrets. And there's some actual book club questions in the back.
Ooh.
So when you're done reading, you can I would say, hopefully it'll provoke some thoughts, and you can think about things that you might want to share with other people.
I like it. The podcast is Living the Next Chapter, so I have to ask, the book is out, and we want to celebrate. We want to celebrate all year, obviously. We want to just revel in this. But
for the rest of my life is what we're going to be celebrating.
But I do have to ask, because of the name of the show, how are you living your next chapter? Now that this part's done, there's a new chapter starting for you. What is it, and what are you living next?
Well, I'm very excited. So my publisher is a small independent press, which focuses on the brilliant work of women over the age of 50. It's their words, but I say it whenever I can. And they're wonderful. And it's called Sibylline Press, like the Sibyls of the Greek mythology, and they've taken my second book. So that will be coming out in July of 2026. That is called The Last Summer at Feather River. But what that means now is I have started a new novel, and I'm about 20,000 words in, and I am in the exact same situation as your listeners, where I am sitting in my chair, staring at the blank cursor with my tea and my dog, and my little timer going, telling me I'm not allowed to get up until I at least do something. So I'm in the painful process of writing, but I know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. So
awesome. Well, one of the songs that kind of inspired this podcast, I love music, Natasha Bedingfield, the song is called Unwritten. And in that song, she says, staring at the blank page before you, right?
Yeah.
And she talks about today is where your book begins. So there you go. So you can throw that song on some point while you're going to be inspired and go, okay, it's going to happen. And I'm excited for you that it's already happened and more great things coming. You got to come back and keep us up to date. Okay.
I will be happy to.
All right. And we'll celebrate with you as more things come out down the road. It's so great, Karen, having you here. Thank you for all the great links and for the great community talk as well. We'll have links to everything in the show notes as always. But again, thank you so much for doing this. And again, for bringing the sunshine of California up to some Canadian guy in Canada. I love it. Thank you for being part of the podcast, Karen.
Well, and thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun.
Awesome.
And I just hope people don't get discouraged. Just write. You have to just write. If you want to be a writer, write. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad.
Do it. There you go. Great words. Great thoughts, Karen. Thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for being here for the Living the Next Chapter podcast. So glad to have you as part of our family of listeners. There's a seat for you just here on Living the Next Chapter, and I'm so happy that you have listened to all the way to the end. Wow, you are now my new bestie. I want to let you know that I host 7 other podcasts on top of Living the Next Chapter. Yep, 8 total. One of them is called the How To Podcast series. If you are thinking, you know what, Dave, this podcast thing seems like a lot of fun. Well, I'll give you a secret. It is. It's a great, amazing, fun time where you can get to meet great people, get your word out there, promote your book, promote what your coaching program, whatever you're doing. Podcasting is great. And if you want to learn how to do this, what you're hearing right now, head over to howtopodcast.ca and look up the How to Podcast series on YouTube, whatever app you're listening on. You'll find me there. And I'd love for you to come listen to how to do this. And if you're interested and have questions on how to podcast, reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. Talk soon.